I'm Rob from Jim and Rob Overanalyze Movies, the podcast for movie lovers who love to talk about movies as much as they love watching them, and maybe even a little more. Jim and I recently checked out the Netflix original A Futile and Stupid Gesture, starring Will Forte. It's a comedy biopic about the rise and fall of National Lampoon co-founder Doug Kenney, as he built a comedy empire and molded our pop culture in the 1970s. I think A Futile and Stupid Gesture is worth your time. Now, that said, for you folks who buy fair trade, for your information, this film does not pass the Bechdel test, nor does it sport a Reframe Project stamp of approval. The more you know, right? Now, if you want to know more about the movie and why I recommend it, stick around. Otherwise, you're dismissed. Do me a favor and hit the like button on your way out.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Recorded in the Rob Christensen Radio Network's socially distant studios, it's Rob Reviews Movies. Okay, now that they're gone, we can get back to business. Unless you're here from Instagram, then welcome. Here's a little bit more about the movie.
What if you say, I was the man who changed comedy forever, but I couldn't change myself?
Really? Blow me.
A Futile and Stupid Gesture opens with a very short scene set in the early 50s, alluding to a less than awesome childhood for our tragic hero, Doug Kenney. We then jump several years to Harvard University and the moment where Doug, now and for the rest of the film played by Will Forte, meets Henry Beard, played by Domhnall Gleeson in a terrible wig. Henry is Doug's first creative partner and future co-creator of National Lampoon. This is also the first of several times we hear Doug introduce himself as Doug Kenney, Chagrin Falls, Ohio. The film jumps another 4 years to the Harvard Lampoon's official clubhouse, where Doug and Henry, along with a bevy of super waspy fellow students, are celebrating their latest and final coup at the club. The launch of Bored with the Rings, Harvard Lampoon's ridiculously successful parody of the Lord of the Rings fantasy books. This is where Doug meets his soon-to-be first wife, Alex, played by Camille Gotti. We start getting the idea that Doug might not be the most reliable person, and that Doug thinks Henry is the real brains and talent of their comedy duo. Doug's a little insecure. Which leads us to the founding of the magazine, and that it came about in large part because Doug didn't want to get a real job, further his studies, or split up with his best buddy Henry, who would have otherwise went to law school. So he convinces Henry to give starting a humor magazine a shot. After a funny series of failed pitches to Time Life and the like, they end up in the offices of Weight Watchers magazine and its publisher Matty Simmons, played by Matt Walsh, and National Lampoon is born. The rest of the first act is spent introducing us to some of the key early writers at National Lampoon, letting us know that Doug did marry Alex, that creative people in New York in the 70s drank a lot and did a fair bit of drugs, and that after a terrible first issue, National Lampoon and Doug's career began to really take off. The rest of the film follows this ever-growing success, along with Doug's growing insecurities, failed home and work marriages, and a lot more drinking and drugs, not to mention the concomitant consequences. It is a movie about Doug's rise and fall, you know.
Let's do this. This is for the magazine, right?
A Futile and Stupid Gesture was directed by David Wain, a mere NYU graduate whose first feature was the 2001 nostalgic summer camp movie spoof Wet Hot American Summer, which I always thought was an homage to the 1979 summer camp comedy Meatballs. Now, based on the book of the same name written by Josh Karp, the screenplay was written by John Aboud and Michael Colton, both Harvard graduates and writers of The Penguins of Madagascar. Take from that what you will. Now, let's talk about what worked. First of all, the filmed story. By the end of the film, I was emotionally invested in Doug Kenney and his friends, and the ending really did get me in the feels. Now, within the Netflix original look template, which is kind of like an upscale Moxie's, I did think that the cinematography, the costume, and production design, they all gave me the feel of a bittersweet comedy film shot in the late 70s. Will Forte. Much like my podcast co-host Jim, I can find Mr. Forte grating in large doses. But here in this movie, he pulled back on the Forte-ness and delivered a performance that kept me engaged and sympathetic throughout the film. Here's another thing I think they got pretty right: clinical depression. The film shows Kenney regularly remembering only bad parts of his upbringing and ruminating on these moments, forever undermining his own confidence. So he's constantly looking to others for reassurance that he has any skills or talent or even inherent self-worth. Meanwhile, he deprecates and downplays his undeniable talent and skills, all at the same time, not to mention dismissing or disregarding the obvious love and respect he is surrounded by. As someone who suffers from depression myself, I thought it really was a great capture of that kind of selective memory, rumination, and negative self-talk that is particularly damaging to the clinically depressed. So many great comic actors in supporting roles doing their damnedest to capture the spirit of the very real people they're playing, all wearing some of the worst wigs seen on television. Which leads me to the bit. The bit. Now, it's a bit Easter eggy or inside baseball, but it worked for me. They were constantly either referring to a bit or asking each other if you're doing a bit. Are you doing a bit? This isn't a bit. It is a bit. Hey, that's a great bit. It really worked for me. And then with the bad wigs, it was like the meta bit. And believe me, they are terrible. And that they wear them with just such good sportsmanship, but never referring to them. They're so seriously. I really found it all quite funny. The bit was like the meta running gag of the whole film. In a weird way, the most self-referential in a movie that had a few great break the fourth wall moments. I thought the bit was really there taking it to another level. And yeah, that really worked for me. Now, let's talk about what didn't work. You know what? Honestly, at times, I felt it was one clique of Harvard grads, to be crass, jerking off over the past exploits of an earlier clique of Harvard grads. And I found it a little much. That said, that could be more about me than it was about the film. Now, I had referred to earlier that this film doesn't pass the Bechdel test. And they even had a kind of a moment of filmmaking self-awareness, and they kind of had a little fourth wall breaking scene to sort of explain that. And let's play that now.
Maybe if one of you had been black, we could have included you.
So there were no funny black writers in the 70s?
And just one funny woman.
Oh, I'm sure they were out there. It's just that we didn't think to look. It was a different time. In our defense, we also had very few Jews.
That's fine and all, but it's interesting that when you look at the crew list, when you look at the people like the producers, everyone above the line, big names in the crew list, I mean, all of a sudden you're kind of going, wow, it is 2020. I appreciate you couldn't find funny women writers back in the day because you just weren't thinking about it, but it's 2020. You could have. brought women into the writing room. You could have, put women in senior positions in the crew. Heck, you could have even, there's things you could have done to address the issue of diversity now, which is one of the points of that whole Reframe project. That they're only, well, that was the way it was then. You start to go, but you're not doing anything about it now. It's problematic, and given what's going on in our time now, you got to think about it, and then all of a sudden it's there, and it takes a little away from my enjoyment of what's a pretty damn good film. Now that leads to me wondering, why isn't this a great film? Because it's a well-made film, and it's really talented people, and they obviously had a passion for the subject. And in those cases, it's always hard to point out where mistakes were made and how it could have been better. That said, I'm an internet critic. I accept this challenge. Maybe one of the things is that they made a very clear choice to put Doug Kenney in a positive light. And, that's it. So it kind of tends to be more hagiographic than biographic, which is a perfectly reasonable choice. And obviously the man was just very well loved. All these people that are referred to in the film they all got thank you credits. They were all talked to when the book was written, when the script was being developed. These people are still alive, and it seems that they really still loved this guy, even though he shuffled off his mortal coil 40 years ago. And so I think it's not an unreasonable choice, but maybe that's one of the reasons why I'm not going, wow, this is a great movie that should be on lists. Another thing is, and this is more about me, because even as we watch, we're bringing our own stuff to the film, to the watching experience and the interpretation, right? Is I might not have been as invested because I really couldn't relate to the protagonist and his friends. I grew up poor, working class family. So, watching these people struggle at Harvard, I'm only upper middle class. So I needed, a scholarship to, put me over the top at, probably one of the top 2 institutions in North America. It's like, I'm not really. Oh, and you can just go hustle a few $100,000 and somebody's got savings, et cetera, et cetera. You know what? It's harder to get invested in their struggle. And that's another thing that, just thinking about it, it's kind of a low arc, in filmmaking sense, a low arc struggle. And like I said, I suffered from depression myself. So I'm not, trying to take away from that very real struggle with mental illness, no matter what socioeconomic background you come from. It just sucks. Take that from me. Now, and then maybe the other thing is like I said, another thing I bring to the table is sort of my own left-wing political kind of worldview. And yeah, that kind of, hey, I appreciate that Doug Kenney wasn't hiring with an idea of a diversity. Why'd that stop you? Was this like totally, no, we're going to make it like they did then with sexism and everything. So that might have been something that took away from the film. But even as I think about it, I think a lot of it more had to do, I couldn't get as invested because I'm going to be reviewing another movie that Jim and I recently took a look at where you could argue it has all these same problems, maybe even more, and I loved it. So, but we'll get to that later. We'll get to that in another review. Anyway, so that's kind of my ideas, but I'm not sure. Like I said, it's so hard. What I'd love to hear are your thoughts, on any part of this review, but especially on the, hey, was there something missing? Or do you think it's a great film? Or do you think, no, this is unsalvageable? I'd love to hear your thoughts on what could have made this better. throw your ideas in the comments. I do my damnedest to answer them all. And I'd love to, it's for me, it's all about the conversation. Anyway, so now the recommend. If a futile and stupid gesture is on your radar, or it wasn't, but you like this kind of flick, definitely check it out. I'm pretty confident you'll find it was worth your time. And I think that's about it. Oh, after you've seen it, check out the conversation Jim and I had about it. The link's here, or maybe here. I don't know, it's somewhere. Like I said, I am all about the conversation. And of course, please like, subscribe, and ring-a-ding the bell so you can get the heads up on the next show we dive into. Okay? I think that's about it. Bye-bye!
I've been in your waters. I came for sure. I've never been so close before. It's one way or the other.
Is that it? We're cut? We're cut. Cut. Cut, cut, cut.